Hey everyone, welcome back to Eli's Echo. I'm your host, Eli Albalos. On this edition of Eli's Echo, I have a special guest, Christian West. Christian hails from Denmark and has a tremendous amount of experience in executive protection. So I'm super anxious to get the podcast started. I really hope you enjoy. Please drop a like, put a comment, shoot me a message, let me know your thoughts, and if you'd like to hear anything different. Thanks. So without further ado, let me introduce Christian West. Awesome. Hey, Christian, thank you for being my first guest. I have to play with these little sounds here and there, but
hey man, it's awesome.
How are you?
It's the first podcast I've ever had a standing standing applause. I like that. I like that a lot.
It won't be the last time, I swear.
How you doing, man?
Good. I appreciate you being here, Christian. It's been a long time since, we go way back, but it's also been a long time since we chatted. So I'm actually really excited to have a chat today. Just to kind of dig into, your experience and then what you have to do. So sure. Just thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course, man. Anytime. We've always had a good dialogue about things. And I was trying to think how long we go back, but I would say at least 10 years or maybe even more.
Yep. Yeah. No, you hit it on the head. And so for those that aren't aware, one of my previous roles was at Apple. And that was when I got first introduced to Christian. Specifically because he's an expert in the EP world. And I think it goes back, Christian, probably 2013. I was at a conference.
Yep.
And
San Antonio, Texas.
There you go, man. It was Texas. Yep. And Ivor. I met Ivor first. He goes, hey, I have someone I want you to meet.
There you go.
And that was it, man.
Yep.
It goes back from there.
Yep. I remember. Funny how time
awesome,
flies.
Man. You have a better memory than I do. I forgot to San Antonio. I'm like, it was somewhere in Texas.
Yep.
But awesome, Christian. I appreciate you being here. Can you just give us an introduction to the audience about who you are, insight into your experience, and maybe the insight into the many companies that you've started, sure. Just so that folks get an understanding of who you are.
Sure. Well, Christian West, as you mentioned, born and raised in Denmark, in Europe, kind of came into the EP industry or executive protection industry early on, already when I was in my early 20s. I was lucky enough to work for some Danish producers who ended up having a career here in the US. So they brought me over to protect them and did that for about 5 years in Hollywood and around the world. And after 5 years in America, I went back to Denmark, built my first security company, which I ran for a few years. Was lucky enough to sell that to Securitas back in the days when they also bought Pinkerton and a couple of other companies. And they were betting big on special security. Not just guard work, so executive protection was one of them, and I worked with them for a couple of years. And after my time was over with them, I started my company called AS Solution, which grew from Denmark to 16 locations, actually 18 locations around the world. And with the company, I moved back to the US and have been here now for, I would say, 13 years. And I recently, or like 3 years ago, actually to be more precise, sold AS Solution to Allied Universal. And since then, I took a little bit of time off to kind of figure out what I want to do and if I was kind of ready to retire or not, but found out pretty quickly that that wasn't for me. So I started a training company called EP Access that kind of is built on all the experiences that I've done in the personal protection industry. And I used online training as the primary delivery tool, but it's of course backed up by a bunch of personal training, either by myself or by a cadre of instructors. And here I am. So that's kind of like the story from the helicopter, super fast.
Yeah, so I can imagine the background that you went into. Like you covered that in 2 minutes. So
Yeah.
you could probably be here for hours talking about the ins and outs,
That's
man.
True. So
Yeah. No, I mean, kudos to you. Like, honestly, I was looking forward to this conversation today. For those that aren't aware, Christian and I, that unique relationship that we had being, corporate company and then contracting out work, to folks like Christian when he was at AS Solutions and owned it. There's only so much like interaction you can have on professional, personal level. And so today I'm super excited because I actually get to dig into your personal experience, because now it's just me. I'm not talking from a company perspective.
I get it. And yeah, you're right. I mean, when you're a provider to corporate America or corporations anywhere, you always have to kind of like walk a fine balance, right? And sometimes you get close to people and sometimes you don't. But if you get close to someone, it should be on a personal relationship so you can still maintain the professional relationship, right? And I think over the years we've been really good at maintaining a professional relationship, and it's been a great ride. So I was excited myself, right? Because it's always fun when you passed something and you can talk about it, right?
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I think and you're right, because I think we did a really good job balancing, right? So we always balance that professional, but I can't count the number of times where I would call you even when you weren't doing work for us, and I'm like, hey Christian, like I need a contact because I have this unique situation. And that's when you had introduced me to Eric Powell as well, right? Just kind of like happenstance, like, hey, I have someone for you. And so it's kind of that personal advice that almost like a mentorship. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for that. But I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't pay enough attention to, right? And in my world, when you work in that space I do, which is executive protection, it's a very, very small world, right? We're kind of like a fine little niche within the security organizations, security is typically a niche of big companies, right? So we're a niche within the niche, meaning that everybody knows everybody. And I think that one of the best ways that you can actually both be a good person, but also run your business and make sure you have long-term value and make sure that people remembers you as a personal and an approachable partner and a professional player, is to not be afraid of sharing, both share information and share contacts and help each other out, right? I actually, I'm one of the guys that before pandemic, if you had asked me, hey, there's going to be a pandemic and the whole world is going to close down, I would have said, oh shit, let's buy some more ammo or something like that. But now when we came out on the other side, I actually got kind of like reminded that most people are actually good people that like to help each other, right? Because when you really think about it, yeah, we fought a little bit about vaccines and whatever, but for the most part, the world kept together, right? And that's pretty impressive. But I also think that in business, me helping you or introducing you or whatever made me a better partner, and it gave me some long-term value, right? So I think that's super important.
No, that's great advice and wisdom. I think what's interesting is, as you mentioned that, one of the things I try and through my podcast, or, I have, a daily dose recording that I do for folks, just again, trying to push in motivation. I think what's interesting, like you mentioned, if you consider the pandemic, you're exactly right, where, everyone thought the world was ending, but then once you kind of just got accustomed to this weirdness, this pandemic, and it started to become more natural, you really did see a lot of goodness in people.
You did.
And I think it's interesting. I mean, I love how you talk about helping each other and helping others, because I think one of the things that I try and emphasize to folks is you and I took that helping each other in a company perspective, right? Like, hey Christian, how, can you help me with X? And then same thing is I would give you guidance when it came to certain projects. But what's interesting is it seems so natural for some folks like you and I to do that in the workplace, but on a personal level, I think we forget that we can still do that with individuals as that helping hand is be there for folks, connect with folks. And I think that's interesting that in the workplace, it seems natural, but when you start to consider like your personal bubble, you're like, well, I don't know if I want to like put myself out there or extend a helping hand.
Yeah, it's always hard, right? And I think there's different people that kind of like appreciate different things, right? Because every time you have to move, there are the people who say, "Hey, I can help you move." There's the people who says absolutely not, and there's the people that say, "Hey, I chip in for a moving company," right? And I think that kind of tells you a lot about who you are, right? But it's also different, right? Because I sometimes feel like I'm two different personalities, right? Because when you're a business owner, you kind of like almost have to be an extrovert. You have to be out there and talking and selling your products and communicating and networking and whatever. And then when you come home, a lot of people sometimes expect you to be the same person, which is not always the case, right? Because there you kind of like value your privacy and you value your alone time and you value not always doing stuff all the time. And especially when you, like me, has traveled and then done more travel, you really value your time at home, right? So a lot of times you kind of go from being an introvert to being an extrovert when you're at work, right? So it's interesting, and I think that goes for how much we're willing to help people privately as well, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've said it a couple times, like when just depending on the topic that I'm talking about when I introduce something, but I think you hit it really well. Like I am introverted at home. Like I get comfortable. I can do my things. Like I have this amazing studio where it's my work studio, but I like my space. But maybe you're exactly right. Like the minute I step out the doors for work, I can be that extrovert, right? And and I'm starting a couple companies, which I would love to introduce you to as we talk through today. But I think you hit it right. Maybe I didn't realize it is when you're outside in the public view, because you're so extroverted and you have to be, by the time you get home, you're tired.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's like, I don't need to be that extrovert. Maybe, and I didn't think of it that way, is because you're so exhausted out there. By the time you get back, you're like, I'm going to enjoy my space.
Yeah, but it's also a question about, I'm sure if you have listeners here who has their own businesses and have run their own businesses, for instance, when you go to a conference, right? You're primarily there to interact with other people. You're there to learn. You're there to kind of be the face of your own company, right? But then you have employees who are there too, and you want to be there for them as well. And that can sometimes be exhausting, right? Because you have to be the outside that is out there being the face of whatever it is that you're selling. But at the same time, you also have your employees that want to have some of your time, right? And it's kind of the same, at least for me, when I'm out and I'm at work and all of that, I can be a lot of things. But when I'm back home, at least sometimes I like to really just do my own thing and not have too many people around for that. So it's good.
Yeah,
good stuff.
No, I love it. I think you hit it on the head. So I think as you talk about being that owner, right? It sounds like, I mean, you've done really well for yourself. I mean, I didn't realize, again, as we're sharing, like you sold, that your first company was Securitas, and then the second one, LA Universal. For folks that aren't familiar with the industry that might be listening, is those are two of the key names in the world of security. And so, that's a testimony to your ability to be an entrepreneur. As you mentioned, as an owner, you're invested in your people, you're invested in being extroverted. So I guess, and I want to talk about EP Access, but I think before we get there is, given that you've been so successful as this entrepreneur, like what advice would you give to someone if they're interested in branching out their own business, if they're interested in trying to put themselves out there? What advice do you have for those kind of people?
It's always tough because, people always say that, oh, you're a successful entrepreneur and you did these things. First of all, I mean, I also had plenty of projects that didn't go anywhere, right? So you can't be successful with everything that you do. So I've had plenty of things that didn't go the way that they were supposed to go. But I think what's most important is really that you're not afraid of trying. And, people are always waiting for the perfect time of their life. And they're always kind of like, well, if I have money to start this and whatever, right? I never really looked at it that way, right? Because I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do. I really like the protection space that I'm in. And even now, when I have kind of the chance to I don't know, resaddle my life and go out and try and do whatever I want to do, I always come back to what I'm good at and what I really like doing, and that is being in the protection industry, right? And I think that for a lot of people, if they want to create something for themselves that they kind of want to be their own master, or they're really good at what it is that they do and they think other people can benefit from it, they should jump out on their own and do it. But I think kind of like your drive to do what you like needs to be what drives you, right? Because it's not hard to get a really good idea. It's not hard to say, hey, I should do this. What's really hard is to get up Monday morning and execute on that idea. When there's nobody who tells you what to do, you kind of have to make it up yourself, right? How do I get from here to 1 and how do I get from 1 to 10? It's kind of like you're on your own, right? And that's the hard part about being an entrepreneur, right? So I guess the advice is don't be afraid of doing it and don't be afraid of failing. What is it? I'm not that much of a quote guy, but I really like the quote Michael Jordan said about, I think it was him who said that you miss 100% of the shots you didn't take.
Yep.
And I think that's such a good quote, right? Because it is kind of the same for entrepreneurs. If you don't try, you never know if it would have worked, right?
No, I love it. I think, and I appreciate that. I think as I try and create messages for folks as well, I think, one of the things that I've had previously is, it's been said that like fear is an acronym for false events appearing real. And I think what's interesting, right, is we get caught up in our head is when we get in, we think we're inspired, I'm going to go chase this, but then all of a sudden you sit back and go, well, I don't have enough money yet. And so what if I fail? Or what are my friends going to think of me? Or I'm too scared because I feel secure and I feel safe in my little bubble, and you start to come up with all these scenarios. Well, if I do this, I might this. If that happens, this might happen. Versus what's interesting is then they get locked in that fear. But what's interesting is I think if you spin it on the head, if you are driven, and I think you hit it right, like if it's a passion and if you're willing to do it, I think one of the things is not looking at the negative outcome is going, hey, if I take this, like you said, first step to get to step 10, how great could it be, right? What is that positive out of it? And I think people forget to look at the positive potential outcome because there's going to be a downside potentially.
Of course. But it's also a question about, you should never jump into it because you think you're going to make a ton of money. You should never jump into it because you think it's a shortcut to a really good life where you don't have to work so much, right? A lot of people say, oh, you work for yourself, so you don't have to kind of like you can take off whenever you want and all of that stuff, right? And of course, there's an element to that, but when you work for yourself, there is no such thing as taking off, right? It's just moving the time around so it fit. And a lot of people look at how great it would be to be an entrepreneur, and it's such a fashionable thing, and especially us who worked in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, everybody thinks that if you're an entrepreneur, I mean, instantly you're a millionaire and eventually a billionaire, and all startups is like an overnight success and whatever, right? I mean, it takes time, and you've got to be able to put in the elbow grease, and you've got to be really good at what it is that you do. And the hardest part is you can also never be scared of pivoting, right? Because you got to follow your heart and your clients and your products and all of those things, right? But if you have it in your heart and you believe in it, and you become really good at what you do, I don't think starting a company and making something out of yourself is that hard. It's hard work, but a lot of people can do it, but they don't do it because they're afraid of losing the safety net, or they're afraid of kind of letting go. And that's probably the biggest downfall most people have when we talk about entrepreneurship.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think, like you said, is be realistic.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not going to be easy. There's long days. But I think what's interesting, and and maybe we could tie this into EP Access, but I feel like, because I have a handful of things in the air that I'm working on. Like I'm just about to launch my a Bitcoin ATM company. Going to get that out there. I'm about to launch a consulting company. My book's coming out next year. And what's interesting though is those are really big feats on top of my full-time job with Google, on top of, I'm in a doctoral program trying to get my doctorate. So there's only so much time in the day.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to hear from you. Like when I feel like when I'm actually doing something I like, even though it's hard, it doesn't feel like work. I'm putting in the effort, but it feels almost effortless. It doesn't, like the other night I was like, man, it's already midnight, but I was working on some content for my consulting firm. So it's like, what are your thoughts there? Like, I mean, tell us like why EP Access for you, or what's your next step? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, the whole thing about time management is one thing that always kind of like makes me smile, right? Because every time I'm out with friends or meet family or hang out with people, they go, hey, did you watch this movie? And I go, no. Did you watch this TV program? And I go, no. And people always kind of laugh because even though I've been in the personal protection space, I have zero idea of who famous people is who, right? Because it just doesn't interest me that much, right? And I'm not me, Eli, I'm not like an intellect person in any way. I'm not very book smart, and I'm not like numbers smart, whatever. But for some reason, I have figured out the protection space that I'm in, and it never feels like I'm working. Because the funny thing is, after I sold AS Solution and pandemic hit, I probably took a year off where I kind of didn't know which way to go. I was kind of like, didn't know if I had the time off, and I needed some time because I had been traveling more than 250 days for the past many years. So I needed some time to find myself. But after I found myself, I also found myself sitting and nerding out on my old kind of like work and the things that I'm really interested in, which is the protection space, right? And I realized that in all these years, and even today, it doesn't feel like work. Of course, there's stuff that I need to get done for the company that I don't like doing. And of course, there is stuff that I like better than other stuff. But at the end of the day, it's me and one of my really good friends that has worked for me for years. We would always kid to each other and say the worst thing that could happen is that we have to have a real job, right? Even though we're running a company that have, I don't know, we were at $68 million and had about 700 employees worldwide, right? But it didn't feel like a job because it was just it was fun,
Yeah, that's I love it. No, and I will add for folks that are listening, you don't give yourself enough credit, Christian, right? And I think there's several types of wisdom in the world, right? And so as you mentioned, like certainly if as you self-proclaimed, you might not be that academic that is studied up and looking into theories, but I think one thing that you have is the intellectual ability of practicality.
Sure.
I think you've loved the EP world so much in that industry because you're actual practical. Like you started from the ground up.
Sure.
Like you've lived this industry and learned the hard way what theory can't teach you. You've been in it, and now it's in your blood. You can't get away from it.
No, and I agree with you on that. It's just hard to say that. When you're in it, right, and you kind of get it, and I think this goes for a lot of different categories of work and different categories of the workplace, right? But I mean, yeah, I'm good at the practical side of protecting other people. But when you really think about it, protecting people is keeping people away from danger or keeping danger away from people, right? It's one of the two. And at the end of the day, when you look at it, I don't think I did anything different than other people did because there's a lot of logistical things involved in it. And if you're good at that, it's hard to say, hey man, I'm a logistical genius, or I'm really, really good at these things, right? Because when it comes natural to you and you became good at it, it doesn't feel like it's hard. But then when you see how other people do it and how other people fail and how you can get better, you go, oh my God, they can't figure this shit out. And it's so simple, right? So I get what you're saying about not giving yourself enough credit, but I also think it's a question about, some industries are so much up for disruption. And, when you have some good ideas, people ask me all the time, like, you're coming to the end of your non-compete. Are you going to do a new AS solution? And I'm like, hell no. Why would I do that? 3 years has gone by. I could do something much better today, much smarter. There's so much new technology. There's so many things that has developed and has done better, right? I mean, both you and I have a background working in all these technology companies, and you know better than I do, 3 years is a long time in their world of technology, right? But, the security and the protection space, we're still stuck in a world of pen and paper and folders and binders and clipboards, and I'm kind of like, guys, we need to do better, right? And I'm one of the older guys now in this, and I wish some young people would wow me with new stuff and new technology and whatever. But I guess sometimes there are some people that has to be the innovators and the disruptors and all of that, right? And I guess that just feels natural to some people. So that's where it comes from, I think.
Yeah. And for those that aren't aware, so a non-compete, so what happens is for someone like Christian that sells one company to another, the company that bought it will tell him basically, you can't build another business that's similar to this one for X amount of years. And so as Christian, now you're coming up on the end of your non-compete for 3 years. Now that does open the doors up for Christian to be able to build something similar. And so obviously, like you mentioned, like you don't want to build another company with like the one you just sold. No. You're looking at something different. So I guess, what do you see for trends? So, whether it's trends in, leadership in your industry or EP, or what do you think would help take EP to the next level now that you've had this time to maybe, game theory your next steps? What do you kind of see those trends either that you see coming or would like to see happen?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things to begin with. If you look at the demographics of the workforce and the demographics of the coming workforce, right now it's almost impossible in any line of work to find enough people that want to work and want to do it. We see all these empty jobs and job postings being repeated and repeated, right? And if you look at it, especially in the security industry, where we're a service industry and we're not a highly skilled industry, and for a lot of people, we're kind of like, for a lot of young people, it's not a meaningful job, right? So I think the security industry in general will have much harder time because the uniform security industry and stuff like that is even more trivia than EP can be. But at least in EP, we can pay people a decent salary and we can give them some excitement from travel and training and whatever. But we still can't fill the jobs today. And if you look at the generation that comes into the workforce, will be the smallest generation that we've ever had. And they will also be one of the richest generations of people to come into the workforce. So if you want to fill service jobs, you've got to make it really, really good and attractive for people to work there, right? So I think a lot of it starts with your people. You need to find a way where you can attract talent and keep talent, right? So you have a high retention, but you also got to find out a way where you make it meaningful and you make it better than what we went through, right? Because, just the whole thing of when you're in the protection space, like, can we keep up a kind of like level where people can live wherever they want and deploy to work? We have to create something like that, right? Because as well as I do, in Silicon Valley and some of the other hotspots, it's almost impossible to find talent. But if you go to some of the American states where they don't have the same options. If you can be a protection guy and make over 100 grand and maybe live in Omaha and fly to wherever you get deployed for 2 weeks and come back home, all of a sudden you're a city king if you can make 100 grand in some of these cities, right? And there are plenty of talent in these cities, just not plenty of talent where our clients are, right? So I think one of the biggest trends that we're gonna see is somehow we gotta figure that out, and our leadership that's gonna lead these new companies in the security world, one of the first things they're gonna figure out is how are we gonna attract young people, and how are we gonna attract talent, and how are we gonna make it interesting for them to stay long enough.
Now this is really neat. I love your thoughts here, right? Because I think you're exactly right. I think talent pools are tapped in areas like California, like you mentioned, specifically Bay Area. There's so much competition for these EP professionals, but the bottom line is Silicon Valley is no longer A, affordable, but B, appealing, right? So like if you're a young professional, maybe it's okay, right? So if you're former military, former police, or new into EP and not a whole lot of responsibilities, then it might be okay for you to travel and be always on call, living in this small little apartment. But I think in the long term, that's not going to make a person happy,
No.
right? And so it's interesting. I don't know. My mind's kind of wandering, right? Because you and I, again, we go, like when we start talking this security stuff, like I started thinking, but it's almost like, you know, you're up against also the demands of clients, right? And I can speak to that truthfully because I know I've put some pretty heavy demands on you, right? And I still do on people that I contract with. And what's interesting though is maybe what needs to change is the philosophy of those that are contracting this work, right? So I can speak from experience where I know it's like, here's what I want, here's when I want it, and you better always be able to provide it.
Sure.
And so, but what's interesting then is,
but
can you change the contractee company that's trying to get your services? Can you change the mindset to go, look, I know you want a team of 2 people and you want always the same people, but how about this?
Sure.
What if it's 4 people, but 2 people will be in on the ground for 2 weeks, and then the next 2 people will be in on the ground in 2 weeks. And then to your point, what it is I'm still getting my 2 people, but I'm seeing 4 faces. And then someone like you is able to contract those 4 from across the US and have them stay locally for only a couple weeks at a time.
Exactly, right? Of course, people will say, yeah, but there's a lot of challenges with that because they need to have a place to stay and where they're paying their taxes and where they're doing this and where they're doing that. I get it. But at the end of the day, if I solve it and you guys don't solve it, challenge me on it, right? Because right now, when you think about it, and I don't know how it is in the rest of the security space, but again, and I know we talk about the Bay Area, but that's because we have a lot of experience from there that we don't owe off, right? But when you think about it, in the Bay Area today, there is probably around at least 50 to 100 unfilled EP jobs where you start at 120,000 and you have no educational demand, right? I mean, it's great if you have some kind of an education, but you do not need to have a master's degree or a bachelor's degree or whatever. If you have experience, you will be hired in many of these places, right? So when you think about that, it's totally crazy that we have unfilled jobs that will pay you over 120 grand. And the providers that are living of providing people like you workforce, they can't find them, right? Yeah. It's kind of crazy, right? So either we develop, or we're not gonna develop as kind of an industry, and we're gonna see a need, right? Because most people's response would be, well, Eli, you guys just gonna pay us some more so we can steal somebody from one of the other companies, but that's just not gonna work in the long run, right? Because you also gotta remember that if I were smart enough to talk a young man from again Omaha or wherever to move to the Bay Area, chances are of him being happy there is pretty slim, right? Because yeah, he's gonna come to probably his dream job, and he'll be traveling and he'll be doing all of this cool stuff, but he'll bring his wife and kids with him that doesn't really have a chance to do what they did at home, right? Because they can't go into nature. They might not be able to find the school that they had back home. They might not be able to do all of these things. And by the way, you're always stuck in traffic on the 101, right? So it's not attractive for anybody but the people that do the job, but they come with a family. So the chances of them staying for a long time is relatively small, right? Also because they figure out that 120K when you're always traveling in the Bay Area is nothing. You can't even find a house for that.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting. Like, again, like I think you hit it on the head is for clients that are procuring your type of services, can it get to a point where, look, I don't need to know how the sausage is made. Like, I know I'm paying you for 2 people. This is what I'm going to, this is what it's going to cost me. This is what you're billing me. And then however you bring in those 2 people, right? Because to your point is, yeah, maybe relocating that person from Omaha won't work, but if it's a job that does have high travel, you might be able to say, okay, like how many days does this person need to be in the Bay Area versus they're on the jump team that is always constantly traveling. If we want them to come into the Bay Area, once a week, twice a week, then it might be the philosophy of the company to say, okay, we're gonna buy a semi-affordable house as a company and house our incoming EPs on a regular. That pass-through cost for that home is shared by multiple clients, right? Like the administrative fee.
Of course.
And then you cycle people in. So rather than saying, and I think this is, again, this may be the philosophy that has to change from the requester side is, we think that there's comfort in having consistency, right? In the EP world, I want to be consistent. But to your point, with attrition, when companies are constantly upping the ante on pay and benefits and just robbing each other, do you really have anybody consistent? And I think ultimately you don't.
Exactly.
So knowing that's going to happen anyway,
and
let you as a provider say, look, I will give you 2 full-time headcount. Let us determine the logistics of that. You'll get to know the team. You'll get to know a handful of faces. And then you're able to cycle people through, have someone from Omaha travel, leave his family there. He comes to the Bay Area. And it's kind of a shared role versus a dedicated full-time role.
Yeah, but and that's just one way of looking at it, Eli. And I'm not saying that this is the way forward because there's also other ways of looking at it, right? I'm coming from Europe where security always have been technology backed up by manpower. In the U.S., we've always had manpower backed up by technology. So there's also there's always these forums where in security talk about integration, and we talk the future of technology, and we talk about all of these things, right? But truth of the matter is, whenever we go to a conference in the security industry, there's about 1,000 exhibitors who sells you technology of all kinds, right? And then there's kind of an expectation that whatever signal comes from these devices goes to a GSOC, and there's the lowest nominator of an agent sitting kind of trying to do something, meaning that as long as we have that attitude, we'll never have full integration, right? And in the EP space, I don't think anybody has figured out yet how can we supplement with or integrate technology so we can start kind of like, I wouldn't say cutting manpower, but kind of put a hold on how much more manpower do we need, right? I mean, we haven't figured out technology integration at all. We say we have, and we pretend like we have, and we talk about we want to do it, and everybody sits there and go like, oh, we're so good, and what it really is when we talk about integration is that IT has figured out how to be integrated with the security technology, but we haven't figured out how to integrate the security personnel with the technology so we can start getting the synergies, right? And the same synergies, you can go the other way and say, if you needed 2 guys on a protective detail, what if we can start using cameras and scanners and whatever, so you only need 1 guy, or only need 1 guy some of the time?
Yeah. I think that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think the last time we actually saw each other was this year at in Vegas. It was not South by Southwest, was it?
No, it was at what is it called? Like one of the security conferences, ISC West.
Yeah, security
ISC
conference.
West.
ISC.
Yeah.
Thank you, ISC West. And I loved what was interesting. I love walking around, and to your point, like nowadays, drone technology is getting super advanced. Obviously, there's all kinds of FAA regulations around it and requirements to get licensing, but still, it's evolving, right? And it's becoming even more and more advanced. But then what was also interesting is I think what's unexplored to some extent also is like this world of robotics, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you saw that mechanical dog that was like, and it was amazing where this thing could go, and it was operated. And so it is interesting that as an industry, can we pivot, to your point, especially in the US, that technology backed by manpower? Because you're exactly right. It's backwards.
It is.
Right? It's all about manpower, and then, okay, yeah, let's sprinkle technology so that we can say that we're technical and advanced. But we all know that's not just the way it works. That's just not
it's not, right? And when you look at it, it's not like, if you think about it, service jobs are gonna get any cheaper to fill, right? So maybe we're at a point where we should look at and say, hey, do we really need to add more people? Maybe we should really, really, really try to get into some of this technology and see if we can truly integrate it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think, and this is a kind of a good segue into this. And so, you know, my background, my forte is corporate, right? It's just I fell into it. Yours has been entrepreneurship, business ownership outside of corporate. So I guess, so the question is, do you think that it takes a certain personality to work in a corporate environment versus like a smaller boutique environment, or vice versa?
That's
the $1 million question, right?
It is the $1 million question, because I always said to myself that once I was done with my last company, AS Solution, I was going to go work for a corporation because it must be nice, right? But I've also come to the conclusion that I'm probably a horrible employee. So it's always hard to say, because I can only speak from myself, right? I think you're getting different things, and I also think when you think about this, I've been in the tech world for pretty much 3 generations, right? Started when Microsoft kind of became a thing, followed up with Microsoft, then Google became a thing, then the social media companies became a thing, and you know, I worked and this makes me sound really old, right? I worked protection for 3 generations of companies. But there's one thing that I've noticed with corporate employees, right? And that is that whatever job they take, it has a lifetime as well, because they're really good in a startup role, but as soon as it becomes a bigger company, somebody else takes over, and when they get ready for an IPO, or they become kind of like a mature company, other people takes over, right? And then they go back and is with a new company and a new startup and whatever. And I think it's kind of the same when you're working for yourself, right? And one of the things that we always were kind of wondering in my little world of companies was, which of our clients are going to grow to be big clients? How can we predict this? How can we figure this out, right? And we had a bunch of theories and a bunch of things that we tried out and whatever, and we didn't like find out the kind of like golden idea of how does it go. But I think that, you know, I kind of know what I'm really good at, right? And I know what I'm really bad at. And when I come out and become a partner with a client, if the client let me in and is willing to partner, I can help him do quantum leap in the beginning. But once we get there, somebody else in the corporation takes over, and then as the boutique vendor, you kind of like become less relevant, where in the beginning you're really relevant to lift them there, right? And that's kind of the niche that I built. And I don't think I can do that on the inside of a corporation,
Yeah.
right? But that's what works for me as a very boutique owner, right? And I've talked to this with some of my colleagues, and some would call them competitors and whatever, about what are different companies were really good at. And I usually say that for me, really complicated EP details with a lot of moving parts tends to find me, where I'm not really good at really, really simple stuff, because it doesn't kind of like stimulates me enough, right? And I think if you really kind of go in and dissect this for yourself, you figure out who you are in business, but you also figure out who you are in life, right? Because you need to figure out what's fun, and that's what you need to work with, because then you become really good at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think you're exactly right. I think it's interesting, like I can, being on the corporate side, I can testify that I do feel like some roles have a timeline, or as I like to say to it, an expiration date, where, there's only so far I can go in this role. And either there's one or two things, like you said, is going to happen. Either I outgrow it and I leave, or the role outgrows me and I leave. Right. And to your point. And so like, there's always that constant balance in the corporate environment. But at the end of the day, I think as you hit it well, is regardless of the path you're on, be it smaller boutique or corporate, you have to know what you like, right? You have to know where you would thrive. To your point, you thrive in ambiguity, in complexity, in complex details. And that's what keeps you going. You're right. Like I my opinion would be, in corporate, you would get bored, because things get complex, but it ebbs and flows until a point where it's fairly stagnant.
Yeah. And for me, I have multiple times let my job take me around the world with no safety net. I thrive like that. I'm not one of those persons who kind of like lay awake wondering about all the bad things that will happen tomorrow, or potentially could happen tomorrow, right? I'm very much a person that takes things as it comes, and I'm very good at kind of compartmentalizing worries and happiness and whatever, right? And in general, it makes me really happy to have that, right? But other people would be scared shitless when they don't know how to pay the bills, or if we're gonna make it home on time, or whatever, right? And I guess we're all different that way, right? And I think if you're really some people used to say to me that people like me are born 200 years too late, because the wagon trains west had already left, right? But I think there's something to be said about it, right? Because every time you kind of like do a road trip in America and you see these great land, right? You kind of think to yourself, what make people go beyond the next mountain? Because it's pretty here, right? Yeah. But it's kind of one of those things where, and I guess it's part of being an entrepreneur, right? Because when is enough, right? When don't you want to do it anymore, right? There's always kind of like, oh man, it could be really cool to do this client. Yeah, but we're already busy. Yeah, but you know what? We should get this one, and we should do this, and we should do that, right? I think some people will be, myself included, I would probably be killed in too much of a corporate environment. I think I would be really good in corporate startups or in corporate R&D, but I don't think I would be really good in, these kind of monotone roles. It's really funny, because one of our mutual friends said to me, Christian, you should get a job now that you're getting older in one of the private family offices and manage a small team. And I was so in love with that idea until I came out into the car, and I look at myself and go like, so I should manage 7 or 10 people that do maybe 10 trips a year? You know what? That would probably bore me to death, right? Yeah. So I guess you're right. There are different people for different things.
Yeah. No, I love it. I think that's great. Like, it's like the view is pretty here. Why would I go past this one mountain? Like that's a great way to summarize. Like, there's comfort, right? There's comfort in what there's comfort in what you think you like, but you just, and not necessarily that the grass is always greener.
No.
But if you don't push yourself, you won't know what's beyond. It could be greener, It might not be, but you'll never be able to answer that question
Sure.
if you don't
Sure.
try it.
And one of the things, Eli, that has always been kind of like interesting for me is, a lot of the services that we sell is kind of embedded services, right? Where our guys work for corporate America, and they do that for a period of time, and either it gets insourced or it keeps being outsourced. But one of the things that I've always kind of like had to have an opinion about and deal with and whatever is when the people that starts as contractors wants to go in-house, right? And for some reason, these guys always think that they should keep it a secret or I would be mad about it. And I'm like, if I was going to be mad about that, I would be mad my whole life, right? Because it's just a natural progression of what happens. And if you look at it, if I've done my job correctly and found the right people, of course they should go in-house at one point in time. The only thing I say to them is that you're not going to get happier. You're just going to get safer.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, if you're looking for safety, that's definitely where you should go, because you can work here for the rest of your life if you don't fuck up. But don't believe that trees grow into heaven, because you still have to do the same work here. And a lot of times it's actually harder to be in a big corporations because you don't get handheld and managed as closely as you do when you're a vendor, right? Because as a vendor, we show up, we write down our reports because you guys keep us accountable, right? And a lot of these people that transfer into these roles in corporate America, especially in protection, they don't really know what they step into. And sometimes in this space where there's nobody who tells you what to do every day, you doesn't necessarily get happier, right? And so all I'm asking people when they go in is just figure out what it is that you want to do in life. Because also when you kind of like migrate into a lower level security position, there's like 2 or 3 people that are going to get promoted before you. So if you're happy being an agent, it's great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this is great. I think, and just for context for those that aren't aware, so as Christian is painting the picture, when you get folks that represent companies like I do, that either Apple, Facebook, or Google, and we contract these services, we get provided these fantastic, talented individuals. And to Christian's point, sometimes that company decides to make them employees and not necessarily work with a contractor anymore. And so what's interesting about that, though, as you share, having obviously me being on the company side that absorbs, and I know that we've had conversations in previous lives about this exact scenario because I recruited from you, but I think it's interesting to hear your perspective on that, right? You were very honest before when we've talked about this, like, yeah, definitely. If you want the talent, great. It is a testimony, I think, to you, Christian, as the business and the ownership, the development of people. It's a testimony, but it is interesting hearing your side as the perception. And you're exactly right. Is the move into some corporate environment? It's quote unquote, it's safe, right? Nothing's permanent, but is it consistent? Do you know the environment? Sure. Are you going to always know the people? Like, absolutely, it comes with that. But what's interesting is I love your perspective of, like, if you want safety, if you want security, but if you also want monotony, go there. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at growing, diving deeper into the industry, experiencing different clients, then yeah, you don't want to go in the corporate industry, because basically, once you go corporate, it's you get what you get. There really isn't much change other than maybe new projects or new systems, but it's the same job every day.
Sure, it is. And, I think sometimes if you look at what we do in the protection industry, we kind of battle a few things, right? But one of the things that we balance is place and time predictability, right? And then we battle our agents becoming too comfort in their role, right?
Yeah. Because
at the end of the day, if you don't pay attention anymore, you're not a protector, right? People can sneak by you or sneak up on you and whatever. And I think, and this is me looking from the outside in, I think a lot of corporations will have a very, very hard time stimulating agents for a very, very long time, because it's very easy to become complacent, right?
Yep.
And it's very hard for the people who has crossed into corporate America to be moved to another client to get out of the complacency, right? So I think that there's good and bad things about all of it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because it's an ecosystem, right? The providers wouldn't be there without the corporations, and the corporations wouldn't be there without the providers. It's really that simple, right? And when I was a young man, I had feelings involved in that, and then I realized pick your battles. And at the end of the day, it is a testimony to me when you end up recruiting my people. But the real test comes afterwards. Because if I treated those people the way I should be treating them, as my kind of ambassadors in your house, they will keep me employed. But if I was an asshole to them and forgot my social responsibilities as a good employee, they will be the ones who smack the door in my face once they come in-house, right? And that's what I think a lot of security companies like myself sometimes struggle with, right? Because at the end of the day, we sell services and we sell manpower. So if your manpower is not happy, you have a problem.
Yeah. And I think this is a perfect segue. I know I'm keeping you on an hour here, and so I want to kind of keep close to that. I know you're a very busy person.
Hey, I mean, once we get started on this, I'm so passionate that we could make this.
I mean, you and I, we could go hours. We could go hours, and I think there's so many questions I still have. But I think you're exactly right. I think it's this symbiotic relationship where certainly these larger companies need very valuable contract work like you, and vice versa. And that's what kind of keeps the system working. Because also without great companies like you, it makes it harder for corporate companies to recruit talented individuals that they need, right? It's kind of almost like a trial run, right?
Totally.
And I'm sure you feel this more so than we do from corporate America. It's like, if we can just let's test out this one vendor, they're great. And then we kind of see the people we're getting, then that leads to potential hiring, to your point. But I guess one of the last things we'll cover is, as you mentioned, you have to treat that employee right while they're still with you, because when they move on, they'll then keep you in mind. If you don't, then they will find a way to cut ties. So I guess in that sense, what do you think makes a good leader from your end with this, as you're constantly balancing a global company, like you've done several global companies now, as you balance global companies, as you're balancing relationship with clients, developing employees, what do you think makes a good leader?
I think one of the hardest disciplines that can be really, really, really hard, and especially when you're passionate about something and when you've been doing it for a while, so you've seen a lot of things, it can be really hard to truly listen, right? Both listen to your clients, but also listen to your guys and your employees. And then I think it's very, very important that you're kind of accessible. And don't be weak in any way. Don't mistake accessible, nice, kind of like meet people where they are and all of this for weak, right? Because I think most people, especially in some of the harder industries, is looking for people that are not afraid of speaking their mind. But I think it's very important that you can listen and you can kind of like, I always live and die by, if I have employees, I should treat them as well as I possibly can within the perimeters that we have set, right? Because people can understand the perimeters, right? If you explain to them, hey man, I cannot pay you more than this because insurance costs this, I have to make a little bit, the company has to pay for these things, right? But you know what? If you do a really good job with the client, we might be able to raise the price next year and you'll get more money out of it. People can understand that, but it's also the same to come back and don't be unreasonable, right? If people come back and say, hey man, we would really like to change these things because what the company does doesn't make sense here, and you actually investigate it and it doesn't make sense, change it, right? If it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, when you sell manpower, all the people out with the clients is kind of the face that you have, right? They're your ambassadors, they're your diplomats, and they're your highest asset. So if you want to be a leading company and you want to be in the higher end and whatever, it's super important that these employees are happy, right? And you know, you can make them happy in many different ways, but one of the most important ways is to give them room to grow, treat them like decent human beings, and treat them as well as you possibly can within the parameters. There's no point of not doing it, you know?
No, that's awesome. I think, and that's a perfect segue. I think here, you know, like you mentioned, is, you know, accessibility, you know, is a big one to leadership. Vulnerability, I think you hit that great. Some leaders are afraid to be empathetic, to show care and express vulnerability, but it makes you a human being. So that's fantastic. And then that transparent communication, like you said, you can be transparent and honest with people, and I think people are afraid to do that. But once you can say, like, explain, like, here's the why. Like, I'm not, you know, this greedy employer. Like, this is the bottom line. Yeah. And here's how you can help me get you more money. Help me help you by impressing the client. Right. And so that's really great. And I love pivoting, right? Being ready to pivot on the business when it feels like it's the right time, right? And change the business if things just aren't working. So that's really great. And the last one you have is, you know, room to grow. I think that one is really huge right now. I think, to your point, we're going into this era where this new generation is taking the workforce. And I think if there isn't opportunities to grow so people can develop, attain new skill set, potentially leave your company to represent you, as you mentioned, like, if you can't do that for an individual, why would they even bother spending time in your company?
Exactly. And, you know, I also think there's one thing that we cannot speak enough about, and you know, a lot of Americans, especially in the security industry, where we typically have a stigma, right? You know, especially the people that came before us and the people that come outside of kind of like the Silicon Valley area, the New York area, and all of these areas, right? They have a stigma, right, of being these very dry, very cut and paste, cookie cutter security professionals, right? Which is such a thing of the past, right? And we need to be much, 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 much better at attracting a diverse workforce, right? Because especially in the security industry, we've been horrible at it. And I get it in the uniformed world, but in the EP world, where we actually can pay a decent salary, and I think for the most part, when you think about it, an EP job is a really good job, right? I mean, you make good money, you do stuff that's pretty exciting. In the security industry, you don't have to stand out in the rain and get wet all the time, and then you get to travel, you get to do all of these things, and, you know, most of the clients we work for even have free food, right? So we need to appreciate that, but we also need to be able to attract a diverse workforce, and part of attracting a diverse workforce is also listening to it and make room for it.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
So this is perfect, Christian. I think I've taken enough of your evening. So before you go, one more round of applause. There you go. The standing ovation is here for Christian West.
I like that.
I appreciate it, Christian. Yeah, it's always a pleasure talking to you.
Hey, man.
For those listeners, appreciate the time. You know, you'll have in the description, you'll have Christian's contact information for his companies. Check out EP Access, new cutting edge EP training, where Christian brings his world views and his real life experience to practical professionals in the EP industry, executive protection industry. So look for that.
Wow, that sounded really
that's
nice.
It for now.
Thank you.
Hey, that's a soundbite for you, man. You can publish that. You know, that's free of charge for you.
I'll take that. I'll take that.
No, yeah, I appreciate everyone. You know, again, this has been Christian West. I'm Eli Albalos, your host on Eli's Echo. Thank you. I really hope you enjoyed that podcast. Christian West is an amazing human being, has a tremendous amount of experience in executive protection. Check out the links in the description below. Before you go, a few things. Please hit the thumbs up button, drop a like, leave a comment wherever you're listening to me at, send me a message. but all that really does go a long way. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Please remember, tell someone you love them, pick up that phone, send a text message, grab them for lunch, but just share the information. That's it for now. I'm Eli Albalos, and this is Eli's Echo. Thank you.